Good morning, everyone. I'm going to call this meeting of State Government Finance and Elections meeting to order. Again, this is an informational meeting, so there will be no votes. This is the agreement that has come upon. It came out of started in the conference committee, and Senator Kiffmeyer and myself continue working on getting to an agreement on this. It'll be House File 12 in the House, but this is most of the stuff that came out of House File 1952. There are a few exceptions. There were a few additions, and that's very few additions that we had to it. But so we'll start this out by Ms. Spreck. Do you want to take the roll?
Chair Nelson.
I'm here.
Vice Chair Carlson.
Carlson present.
Representative Nash.
Nash present.
Representative Bonner. Representative Drazkowski.
Drazkowski present.
Representative Elkins.
Present.
Representative Greenman.
Present.
Representative Cleaborn.
Cleaborn present.
Representative Kosnick.
Kosnick present.
Representative Mason. You're muted, Representative Mason.
Sorry about that. Present.
Representative New Brindley.
Present.
Representative Pulowski.
Pulowski present.
Representative Quam.
Present.
A quorum is present.
Sydney. Representative Bonner is present as well. Sorry, my mute button didn't work.
Got that.
I always love it when IT people have trouble with IT. Anyway, the bill we have, like I said, this is the A21-0237. It's an amendment, it's the agreement, and it's the amendment to House File 12, Special Session House File 12. And we'll start out by having, which one wants to go first, Mr. Gehring or Miss Roberts?
Mr. Chair, I'll go first, and I'm going to share my screen.
Okay. Please again identify yourself for the record and then proceed.
I'm Helen Roberts from the House Fiscal Staff, and just a second. Now I can't find my document that I had all ready to go. Shoot. Give me a second. And I can start talking. What I'm going to use is the change item spreadsheet, and only showing the columns for the agreement. Sorry, I've never had this happen before. I have the document open, but it's not showing up on my screen share. Maybe you could have Mr. Gehring go while I try to figure this out.
Ms. Roberts, I could share the screen and show that spreadsheet. If that's helpful
Okay.
to you.
Do you want me to, I will email it to you. Sorry, I really apologize for this.
And while they're doing that, members, you said everything was the stuff that's agreed to here. It was the veterans piece was what we agreed to in the conference committee ahead of time. That Senator Kiffmeyer did want parts of the veterans bill, part of the House File 1952 we passed on last day of session, and leadership said we'll just leave everything else out. We'll do the veterans all as one along with the appropriation. But there was a couple things added to that. Money for the Redwood Falls Cemetery, a new cemetery there. There's federal money we have to have. This originally was in the bonding bill. We were asked to carry it because they need to get the money approved, or they're going to lose federal dollars for that. Also, operating costs for the three new veteran homes, was added to our budget. And again, that was in neither one of the House budget or the Senate budget. And then at the end, there was Dropbox language in the election piece that was added. And we can talk about that later, but those are, otherwise everything else that was was there, was in the same and similar, was either passed in the House bill or the Senate bill, that they passed off both our floors. It was part of the discussions of the conference committee before session ended. And there's the screen. So Ms. Roberts, you can go ahead.
Okay, Mr. Chair, members, again, I apologize for that. And I'll try to go slowly so Mr. Gehring can follow along. But again, I'm using the change item spreadsheet, only showing the agreement columns, but the full spreadsheet has been posted to the committee website along with the much more detailed spreadsheet, and then has also been emailed to the committee. And as always, I'm available to answer questions outside of committee. I'm only going to mention things that are actually in the agreement, but if you have questions about line items, otherwise, just stop me if needed. So starting with the legislature, before I dive into the line by line, I just want to refresh everyone's memory that after this state government bill left this committee, it was amended on the floor to create an open appropriation for the legislature, and also canceled the carry forward amounts for the House, Senate, and LCC. This agreement returns to the direct appropriations for the legislature and does not cancel the carry forward amounts. So that's why when you look at the difference column, those are the columns in yellow, it looks like there's a big difference from the House position, but that is reflecting carry forward spending that was added to those numbers after the House amendment. So starting with the Senate, on line 6 is the operating adjustment for the Senate of $3.667 million for the biennium. On line 7, you'll see the House operating adjustment of $2.649 million. And this is the amount that was originally approved by the House Rules Committee. On line 8 is the operating adjustment of $1.079 for the LCC. And this includes salary and other adjustments for the joint offices, similar to the amounts that the House used in putting its request together. It also includes one-time funding for an accessibility vendor and dues changes for organizations like NCSL and the Council of State Governments. On line 10 is a $579,000 base adjustment for the Legislative Budget Office. Line 17 shows the total change over base for the legislature as a whole, and that's $7.974 million in direct appropriation changes. And then finally on line 24, you'll see a change to a statutory appropriation that currently goes to MMB for the preparation of local impact notes and other activities related to local governments. And this $414,000 is transferred to the Legislative Budget Office instead to be used for preparation of local impact notes. And you'll see that language in Article 2 in Section 18. So moving on to the state auditor. The state auditor receives an increase of $2.8 million over base. This includes 3 change items. On line 28, there's an operating adjustment of $1.252 million. On line 29, $63,000 in one-time funding for security improvements. On line 30, $1.5 million for a school finance accountability team. And this is for audits of school districts that have volunteered to have the state auditor perform their annual audit at no cost to the district. And then finally on line 33, again, you'll see the $2.8 million total change for the state auditor. Moving on to the Attorney General. The Attorney General receives an increase of $7.86 million over base for the biennium, and this includes 5 change items. Line 36, $4.95 million for the litigation technology resources. On line 37, $1.029 million in one-time funding for security improvements. On line 38, $700,000 for wage theft enforcement. On line 39, $600,000 to maintain and stabilize experienced attorney staff. And then on line 40, $578,000 for enhancing antitrust resources. And then moving down onto the next page, let's start with the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State receives $4.25 million increase over the general fund base for the biennium. Then this includes on line 45, $500,000 in one-time funds for relocation of the office's business and IT services. On line 46, $32,000 in one-time funds for security improvements. On line 47, $220,000 increase for the Safe at Home program. And then on line 54, you'll see $1.5 million for election equipment grants to local governments. And this is a change over the House position. Was not included in the House bill. And then the next line on line 55, again, you'll see a Senate position of $2 million for local grants for ballot drop boxes. Well, actually that was not a Senate position. This is new to this agreement. And then finally on line 60, you'll see the requirement that $3 million of already appropriated HAVA funds to be used as grants to local governments. And this, again, you'll see language for this on section 41 on page 20. Moving down, the next three items, Campaign Finance Board, CAP Board, Administrative Hearings. These are on lines 63, 67, and 71. These are the first of several small agencies or boards that received operating adjustments that matched both the House position and the governor's recommendation. And as we go through the spreadsheet, I'm not going to walk through them line by line unless members want me to or have questions. I will point out where the amendment differs from the House bill. So moving down to minute services. Minute services has a total increase of 4.4 million over base. This includes on line 75, 4.15 million for the Blue Ribbon Council recommendations, and on line 76, 229,000 for an operating adjustment. And then at the bottom of the spreadsheet, you'll see just the note that the bill also includes the approval of cash flow assistance. This is something that has been done for several years in the state government bill. So moving to the next page, starting with the Department of Administration. That department receives a $2.4 million increase over base with three change items. On line 83, 1.248 million for the in lieu of rent increase. And this is to pay for the space that the in the SOB and then house and ceremonial space in the Capitol, et cetera. On line 84, there's $896,000 for an operating adjustment. And I should also note here, I may have missed that on minute, that there's a negative adjustment or a reduction in fiscal year 21. You'll see those for some of the larger agencies and then carried forward at the bottom of the spreadsheet. And then finally for Department of Administration on line 93, there's a $250,000 increase for the AMPERS grants. Moving on to Minnesota Management and Budget. MMB has a $4.5 million increase over base for the biennium. On line 97, you'll see a $1.617 million operating increase. And again, here on the fiscal year 21 column, you'll see a negative 1.367 million reduction in 21. On line 98, there's a $414,000 direct appropriation. This is to replace the statutory appropriation that I mentioned earlier that was transferred to the LBO for local impact notes. On line 100, there is a direct appropriation of 2.488 million for MMB assuming the single audit responsibilities from the legislative auditor. And then on line 104, you'll see the negative $414,000 for the transfer of the statutory funding for the local impact notes. Moving on to Department of Revenue, so the Department of Revenue receives $11.034 million increase over base. That includes on line 107, an operating adjustment of 10.784 million. And then on line 108, a $250,000 increase to the VITA grants. And this brings the total funding for these grants to 1.4 million for the biennium. Now here again, we're going to come down to a list of small agencies on the next page or two. Again, I'm not going to go through these except to highlight the exceptions for that from the House bill. The first one is on line 132. So that would be on the next page for the Historical Society. I'll wait until scroll down. So on line 132, you'll see the Historical Society operating adjustment is 600,000, which is 500,000 less than the House position. And then the Historical Society on line 133 also receives $250,000 in one-time funding for site improvements to Farm America, and this was a Senate position. On line 137, the Arts Board does not receive an operating adjustment in fiscal year 22 and 23, but the base is increased in 24-25 to include an operating adjustment. On line 145 for the Humanities Center, here you'll see that there is $650,000 included for the Healthy Eating Here at Home program, which you may also know as the Market Bucks program. This funding was in the base of the Department of Agriculture, so it was funded in the House Agriculture bill, but was cut in conference committee. And so now the funding has come back into the state government finance bill. And then finally, on line 157 for the Cosmetology Examiners Board, the agreement does not include an operating adjustment for this board. Moving down to the next page, at the top of the page, you'll see on lines 165 and 166, the increases for the Gambling Control Board of $3.9 million. And this comes from the Special Revenue Board account, not from the general fund. The next change is on line 173 for Military Affairs. There is an operating adjustment of $588,000. And for the last agency, Veterans Affairs, there's a total general fund increase of $30.9 million for the 22-23 biennium. This includes an $8.2 million operating adjustment for the Veterans Homes and Programs and Services. On line 178, $1.65 million for the Preventing Veteran Suicide Initiative. On line 179, $6.33 million to prevent and end veteran homelessness. And on line 180, $500,000 in one-time funds for the 9/11 task force. The next two items, I think the chair already mentioned on line 183 and 184. These are items that were not in the House or Senate bill, but only because of the timings of the request. On line 183, you'll see staffing costs for the 3 new veterans homes. Federal funding was approved by the federal government for these homes in April. And so you'll see funding both in this biennium and continuing into the tails. On line 184, state matching funds for the new Veterans Cemetery in Redwood Falls of $4.5 million. This funding was included in the governor's bonding bill, but was moved to this bill because of just timing issues. And then finally, the other changes in Veterans Affairs. On line 186, $800,000 for the Veterans Resilience Project. On line 187, $200,000 for 2 veterans rest camps. This includes $75,000 each year for a grant to Camp Bliss and $500,000 in one-time funds for a grant to Veterans on the Lake. And then on line 189, there's a $58,000, cost to the Veterans Home Special Revenue Fund due to an adjustment in the personal needs allowance. So moving down to the bottom of the spreadsheet, just to sum up the changes. On line 193, you'll see the direct general fund expenditure changes totaling $78.537 million. Following that, there's 2 changes in general fund revenues. On line 209, just over $1 million in revenues from the vendor rebates from the Payment Plus program. That's an initiative of MNB. And then on line 211, a cancellation in fiscal year 21 of $179,000 from the Information and Telecommunications account, which people may know as the Odyssey account. So finally, for the general fund reconciliation, on line 227, again, the total general fund expenditure change of 78.537 million, total revenue changes of just over $1 million. And so the net of those expenditures plus new revenue is 1.247 billion for the fiscal year 22-23 biennium. And then lastly, we bring in the total fiscal year 21 appropriation changes on line 233. That's a reduction of 10.585 million. And so the net on line 234 for the total general fund spending from fiscal year 21 to 23 is 1.237 billion. And that concludes the spreadsheet.
And Representative Nash, did you want to ask a question on the spreadsheet or overall?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess it's in regard to the drop boxes, both from a policy perspective and from a funding perspective. So you tell me how you like to dispense with the question.
Why don't we go through have Mr. Gehring go through it, then we can answer those questions at the end.
Very good.
Thank you. Mr. Gehring.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to walk through the actual DE amendment. And so Ms. Roberts has done the spreadsheet, and so I'm going to skip through all of the appropriation items on the DE.
If you want to identify yourself for the record, too, please.
Yep, Mr. Chair, Matt Gehring from the House Research Department. And then as we go through, I'm going to be joined by Jeff Diebel, also from House Research, for the Military and Veteran Affairs article. So to do this part of the walkthrough, as I said, Ms. Roberts already walked through the appropriation items, so I'm going to start at the very end of Article 1 and then go through the rest of the policy articles. So if you're following along with the DE amendment, I'm going to start in the middle of page 20 with Article 1, Section 42. So sections 42 and 43 at the very end of Article 1 are two policy sections that extend the availability of Help America Vote Act funds by 4 years. So the first appropriation extends it until March 23rd, 2027. And the second appropriation, which is the 2020 pot of money, is extended to be available to the Secretary of State until 2028. And then following starts Article 2, which is the general state government operations policy article of the amendment. Section 1 is the establishment of the Legislative Commission on Cybersecurity. This was Representative Bonner's bill in the House. Section 2 establishes August 15th of each year as India Day. This is the bill that came from the House that Representative Cleaborn worked on. And there are some revisions in this language since it left this committee in the House floor. And that's what you see in this amendment. Section 3 is a section that comes from the Senate bill. So there's a process in the administrative rulemaking procedure where a set of rules could be proposed as either going forward with or without a public hearing. And there's an option for certain numbers of people to request a public hearing for that to occur. This is a section that reduces the number of people that are required to request a public hearing in those instances from 100 to 50. And that was a Senate position in the Conference Committee. Section 4 is the policy section that Ms. Roberts mentioned. This is transferring the single audit responsibility from the legislative auditor to Minnesota Management and Budget. So this is a language that goes along with that. Compared to the language that we saw, that the committee saw at the end of the regular session, the appropriation for this transfer or this work is shifted from a statutory appropriation to a direct appropriation. You saw that in the spreadsheet just a few minutes ago. Section 5 of Article 2 is the policy language that authorizes MMB to make virtual payments to vendors. So this is the process of allowing money to be transferred to state contractors who are owed money from the state electronically rather than by a physical check. Section 6, which is on page 24 of the DE amendment, requires Commissioner of Administration to charge an electric service fee to individuals who use electric vehicle charging stations on the Capitol complex. The House had similar language in the bill coming off of the House floor, and this is sort of a hybrid approach between the House and Senate versions of language on this item. Section 7 on page 24 is the requirement that MMB use a pharmacy or use a reverse auction process to select a pharmacy benefit manager to help manage the prescription drug benefit for the CGIT program. There are some revisions throughout this section that came in the last couple of weeks, including the process for determining whether the reverse auction process would continue into the future based on documented whether savings were documented from this approach or not. And if there are specific questions, we could talk through those individually after we get through the walkthrough. And that section runs a number of pages in the DE amendment. The next section is section 8. This is a Senate section that requires certain reports of the state archaeologist to be provided to the State Historic Preservation Office in addition to the Indian Affairs Council and the Historical Society. Section 9 is language that eliminates requirement that a salon school manager be a cosmetologist. And then sections 10 through 16, which also spans a number of pages in the DE amendment, contains a number of administrative provisions that were requested by the Racing Commission related to their operations, and particularly the way that they function and can operate during a pandemic. And that takes us all the way to page 32. Section 17 is language that was in the House bill originally that expands the eligibility for organizations to receive what are called the VITA grants or the taxpayer assistance grants. So this conforms the eligibility requirements for those grants at the state level to the eligibility in federal law and within the Internal Revenue Code. Section 18 is a policy item that goes along with it, a spreadsheet item that Ms. Roberts already mentioned. This is the transfer of county program aid funds to the Legislative Budget Office for the purpose of conducting the local impact note process. And section 19 is a Senate provision. This committee did hear a similar bill in the regular session that establishes daylight saving time or summertime, the hours that we're on right now, as the standard of time year round in Minnesota. That will be effective upon enactment of federal legislation that authorizes that change to occur. And then section 20, this is the last section of Article 2, directs the legislative auditor or requests that the legislative auditor conduct a comprehensive review of the state's COVID-19 response and make recommendations if there are program services or activities that were determined to not be efficiently or successfully implemented so that changes could be made for future outbreaks. Oh, and then there's one more section at the end of Article 2. This is a section that goes along with the establishment of the Legislative Commission on Cybersecurity, just detailing how the first meetings and appointments would occur to get that commission off the ground. And then next in the DE amendment is the Military and Veteran Affairs article, Article 3. And I'll defer to Mr. Diebel, who I think is on the call, to walk through those sections.
Welcome to the committee, Mr. Diebel. State your name for the tape.
First, this is Jeff Diebel from House Research. I'll walk through the Military and Veterans Affairs Policy article. As a introduction, the provisions are largely those that were in both the Senate and House bills. And so the article is actually the policy scope is much smaller than what the House brought to conference committee. The biggest piece that was not included was Representative Zhang's House File 1442, which was the Military Affairs Department's proposal to rework the military justice provisions in Minnesota's statutes. So that's not in this proposal. What is in is Section 1, which is Representative Bliss's proposal on clarifying the Veterans Suicide Prevention and Awareness Day. The second provision is Representative Eklund provision that authorizes the Department of Veterans Affairs to use funds to pay for a publicity representative. Section 3 is another agency initiative that was also authored by Representative Eklund, and this relates to the Adjutant General selection and replacement process. Section 4 is a piece on the Veteran Stable Housing Initiative, and this was authored by Representative Christensen in regular session, and that was also in both the House and the Senate positions. Section 5, 6, 7, and 8 are from Representative Sandsteed's bill to clarify the Minnesota GI Bill provisions. And again, those provisions were largely identical to the Senate position. Section 9 contains two House and Senate provisions. The first relates to authorizing the Department of Veterans Affairs to operate adult daycare facilities, and that was Representative Lippert's House File 88. And the second provision in that section authorizes the Department of Veterans Affairs to provide dental care services directly to residents of state veterans homes, and that was authored by Representative Edelson. Section 10 was not in a bill, but it was in the House position. It relates to establishing requirements for the Commissioner of Veterans Affairs to calculate the personal needs allowance for domiciliary residents. Section 11 is a piece that was in the House bill, but it was a rider in the bill, and it requires the Commissioner of Veterans Affairs to submit a report to the legislature. The two chairs agreed to codify this provision and make it a biennial requirement for the commissioner to submit this report ongoing. Section 12 is a new section to the bill, but it's related to Section 13, which is the Military Veterans Restorative Justice Act, is what it's been known as. And Section 12 is a conforming change to implement the proposal. So Section 13 was reworked in conference committee. There are some significant changes I'd like to point out to the committee. In subdivision 2B, it removes the requirement that the veteran prove through his or her military records that the offense was committed as a result of their military-related condition or disability. The revised language requires the court make the finding by clear and convincing evidence based on the entire record. Subdivision 2C is reworded, but it doesn't really substantively change the requirements for the veteran offender to be eligible for participation in this sentencing option. Subdivision 2D now requires a Rule 25 assessment if there's evidence that the veteran's condition is based on abuse of substances, either alcohol or controlled substances. The prior version required a chemical use assessment for all veterans in the program. Now it only requires it if there's evidence that that would be warranted. The new version also requires a mental health assessment. That is worded to apply only if the veteran has an applicable condition, but most of these conditions listed would require a mental health assessment. So I think that would likely be the standard course of action in most of these sentencing cases. And finally, in that subdivision 2D, the veteran is required to follow any recommendations from either of the substance abuse or mental health assessments as conditions of their probation. In subdivision 2I, there's a requirement that the State Department of Veterans Affairs work with federal offices to find funding for treatment programs if funding is not immediately available. Moving to subdivision 3, paragraph C, clause 1, the phrase substantial compliance was removed and replaced with in compliance when you're looking at assessing whether the offender has complied with their probationary terms. In subdivision 3, paragraph C, clause 2, the phrase participated in was changed from successfully to successfully completed, and that relates to the offender's requirement to treatment requirements. And then finally, final noteworthy change in this section from what was passed off the House floor is a new requirement that the court consider the harm caused to a victim, even if there is no victim statement. Victims can make statements under both versions of the language, but this would explicitly require the court to consider that input when they make this determination whether the veteran offender is eligible for this program. Moving to the final two sections of this article, Section 14 is a new provision that was brought to the chairs from the Department of Veterans Affairs, and it authorizes the Commissioner of Veterans Affairs to suspend a rule related to calculating the annual cost of care of veteran for residents of veterans homes. And perhaps the chair can speak more to this issue, but it was explained that if this rule was implemented in this year, the cost increase would be very high to the residents. And so the commissioner asked that they be allowed to use their current rate so that there wouldn't be a price shock to the residents of the homes. And the authority to suspend this rule only applies in fiscal year 2022. And then the final section in this article is a revisor instruction that relates to the Representative Sandsteed's bill on GI benefits clarification bill, which I mentioned earlier. That was House File 585 from the regular session. Mr. Chair, that concludes my overview of this article.
Thank you, Mr. Devo. Is it going to go back to Mr. Gehring then?
Yep, Mr. Chair, I'll take it from here. Again, Matt Gehring from the House Research Department. Article 4 of the DE amendment is the elections policy article. Section 1, which you see on page 50 of the DE, comes from the House bill. This is some organizational and terminology updates to the statute that governs the way that the instructions are written on a voter registration application. Section 2 is an existing subdivision of law that relates to post-election sampling. This is the process where notices are sent out to registered voters, and then there's statistics collected on those that are sent out and returned as undeliverable. This section requires that by February 15th of each year, the county auditor notify the Secretary of State of a number of data related to the post-election sampling process. And then by March 1st of each year, the data be submitted to the legislature. The House had a provision that required this after every state general election. The Senate had a provision that required it to be conducted annually. And the version that's in this bill is the Senate position, which requires an annual report to the legislature. Section 3 is the first of a series of sections that are new to this draft that relate to the new standards governing the absentee ballot drop boxes, which we'll see in just a minute. This first section is effectively a conforming section that recognizes the existence of the drop box process and specifying the methods that a voter can use to drop off an absentee ballot, either in person, by mail, or using the drop box process. Section 4 requires that absentee ballots that are returned to a county auditor or municipal clerk be kept in a locked ballot container or another secured and locked space. And Section 5 is the new substantive standards that govern the use of absentee ballot drop boxes in Minnesota. There's a definition in subdivision 1 of what a drop box is. It's a secure receptacle or container established to receive absentee ballots 24 hours a day. And it doesn't include things like U.S. Post Office drop boxes or spaces where a voter would drop off an absentee ballot directly to an employee of the county auditor or municipal clerk. Subdivision 2 has a series of security and integrity standards governing the way that drop boxes would be provided and monitored. Drop boxes are required to be continually recorded during the absentee voting period. They're required to be designed to prevent an unauthorized person from moving, removing, or tampering with the drop box. Drop boxes in outdoor locations must be fastened to a building, bolted to a concrete pad, or otherwise attached to a similarly secure structure to keep it from moving. Drop boxes, ballots that are dropped in a drop box must be secured within that box against accessed by unauthorized persons, and also secured against damage from weather or other natural conditions for drop boxes that are located outside. There are signage requirements for drop boxes, so the drop box must be clearly identified as an official absentee ballot return location, and also must include the location and hours where an agent may return an absentee ballot. Drop boxes must be emptied out, so the ballots in the drop boxes must be collected at least once per business day during the absentee voting period by the county auditor, municipal clerk, or other elections official that's trained in the processing and handling of absentee ballots and the use and security measures that are used for drop boxes. And absentee ballots that are deposited in Dropbox must be properly date stamped and stored after they're collected in a locked ballot container or other secured space, consistent with existing laws governing the collection and storage of absentee ballots. Subdivision 3 of this section requires the county auditor or municipal clerk to establish a list of designated Dropbox locations at least 40 days prior to the start of the absentee voting period, and that provide that list to the Secretary of State, who would then publish the list on the Secretary of State's website. And then there's an option for updating the list of Dropbox locations up to 20 days prior to the start of the absentee voting period. And that updated list would again be posted on the Secretary of State's website as well as the website of the municipality. And lastly, in the section, subdivision 4 prohibits electioneering. So this is campaign activity within 100 feet of an absentee ballot drop box, similar to the standard that applies for prohibiting electioneering around polling places on election day. Section 6 is also a new section in this article that further details the training requirements that are required of members of an absentee ballot board. That includes training and instruction on accepting and rejecting ballots, storage of ballots, timelines and deadlines, the role of the ballot board, and other items you see here. Section 7 is the first of two sections that originally come from the Senate's State Government Finance and Elections Bill. This is a language that specifies how precinct and polling place locations are designated following a redistricting cycle, which you'll see in the next 18 months or so. And Section 8 is a cross-reference that goes with those changes. Section 9 is a section that requires that supplies that are provided to a polling place on election day. Current law requires voting booths to contain a pencil that may be used to fill out an absentee ballot. This language is updated to be more modern, to require not providing a pencil, but to provide a pen or other marking device that is suitable for the voting system being used, and that the jurisdiction providing those supplies must only provide marking devices that will work for the system that's being used in that location. Section 10, which you see on page 57, is also new language that requires that all election materials and records that are retained following election must be stored in a locked container or other secured and locked space. Section 11 contains technical changes. There's no substantive change to the law here. These are just organizational changes into the existing section of law that governs the process that a voter uses to fill out their ballot. Section 12 was a House section in the conference committee that establishes a standard for conducting a recount of a constitutional amendment question. And Section 13 goes along with that constitutional amendment recount section as a conforming change. And Mr. Chair, that's the end of the DE amendment walkthrough. And I'll just point out that within the committee materials, there's a section by section House research summary, sort of our traditional summary that's available to you. And there's also a separate document that's about a page and a half that points out the sections in the policy articles of the bill and where to find them if you're following along with the side by side for House File 1952 if you're interested in that information. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions you have.
Thank you, Mr. Gehring and Mr. Devo. Representative Nash.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this question will be for both Mr. Gehring and Ms. Roberts regarding the Dropbox language that was added in. So maybe we can start with the policy part since Mr. Gehring is still on. The recording of the Dropbox. What does that mean? So recording can mean many things. It could be a fairly broadly interpreted word. And what's the intent? And is there a way to maybe tune that up to be actually more specific? And I'll have more questions, Mr. Chair.
During the discussions, I'll start out, and maybe there was parts of that, and let me find it here. It has to be recorded that they can identify the person that's dropping the stuff off, the ballots off, and.
So, Mr. Chair, does that mean a video recording?
A video recording, yes. Either video or it could be a security camera that's recording it to a DVR, that type of thing.
Okay, and then to the recording question. So I live in Carver County, and you're in Hennepin County, and others are in different counties. What are the data retention requirements, and can counties share with one single repository so that if on the outside chance there were to be a bad actor, someone who came and did something in Carver County and it was recorded, but then went to Hennepin County and that was recorded, and then went to Dakota County and that was recorded, would we be able to detect that by a sharing of those video uploads to one common place so that the Secretary of State could be aware of that, and we could eventually prosecute that person for election tampering?
The recordings have to be stored. I believe that we have in here at least 6 months after the election. All other election stuff is stored. It has to be, I believe, 22 months after the election. And there is going to be, between now and next year, the Secretary of State's going to create a work group to look at this and look at different things. We'll work group with the county officials and to come up with some answers to some of this stuff. And then we probably will be revisiting some of this next year during session, so that there's a lot of questions that were out there on this from the county officials. And so the Secretary of State has agreed to, part of this is to agree to creating a work group to look at all these things and get best practices on this, so that that question would be answered and be something that would be brought up at that time.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Gehring.
Just the language that's in this document, just for clarity, doesn't include the 6-month retention period. You may recall some possible discussion of that, but that's not actually in this draft. So this language is silent about what the retention period would be for the recordings. And there is the default 22-month retention period for all election materials that presumably would apply, but there's no specific direction about that in this draft.
That's right. I forgot that. That was part of the discussion. But yes, it would default to the 22 months, and that's the normal practice for all election records. Mr. Nash, Representative Nash.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And then maybe Mr. Gehring knows, or maybe statute doesn't exist on this yet, but what about the aspect of sharing between counties in order to potentially identify somebody who's actually abusing this? Do we have any language on that, or are we going to hope that comes out of the Secretary of State working group, or what? Because that, to me, that seems like something we'd want to have included on this before we brought it into the bill.
There's no language about that in the bill. It's the bill's silent on that. The language that's in here was originally in the Draheim bill. In that bill, there was nothing in that language that came to us from the Senate. Again, Senator Kiffmeyer is the one that brought this language up, and then we worked through it, but there was nothing in the Senator Draheim's bill mentioning that either. So that's something we probably need to look at.
Okay, and then Mr. Chair, regarding the funding, I know that there's an appropriation per year for this, but what does that include? What doesn't that include? And are there going to be unfunded mandates that get pushed down to the county?
You're breaking up a little bit there, Representative Nash. In the bill, there's $3 million there's $3 million that's going to be spent out of the HABA funds for local election grants. There's $1 million per year for Dropbox, specifically for Dropboxes. And then there's another $1.5 million a year for election equipment grants. So there's money there. Again, there's nothing in this that says a county has to have Dropboxes. This is just basically laying out rules for if they want to have Dropboxes. This is the bare minimum that they have to be. Representative Nash.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I may have questions later, but I'm sure there are other people who would like to ask questions. So if I need to, I'll put myself back in the queue.
Thank you, Representative Nash. Representative Drskowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just kind of a procedural thing. I've been traveling, so I don't have my head in my computer right now. But you mentioned, so this is a DE amendment. I'm wondering about the process. The vehicle bill for this then has already gone to the floor, and then this is the amendment that will be adopted, is what I gathered from what you outlined. And then the other question is, do you know when this bill is going to be up?
The amendment that this is going to be on is the House File 12. That is still in Ways and Means. So this will be put on House File 12 in Ways and Means. And as to when it's going to be up, I have not been told. And I do not know when it's going to be up in Ways and Means either. I haven't been told that. So that's to be determined.
That's all. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other questions? Quiet bunch. We have commissioners here that are here to answer any questions that, and do any of them want to speak? If you do,
Mr. Chair, maybe I could ask one more question.
Go ahead, Mr. Representative Nash.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and to Mr. Gehring or Ms. Roberts or to the Secretary of State or whomever, regarding the accumulation or the collection of video. What are some of the other states, if they have these, what are they doing? What are the statutes that are in them? Do we know anything from some of our places that we can gather information like NCSL or such like that? And then regarding the creation of the locations for them, what's the process for that?
I think Ms. Struthers is on. Is Secretary of State on? I don't see his name on my list here. Ms. Struthers, maybe you can answer that question. Oh, there he is, Secretary of State Simon. Maybe you can answer that question.
Sorry, thank you, Mr. Chair. Steve Simon, Minnesota Secretary of State. Representative, could you repeat that last part? I'm sorry, I just didn't catch it.
Yeah, so the location of the drop boxes, obviously it's permissive language, so a county or municipality or whatever can choose to take advantage of it. But what are the guidelines and guardrails for locating these boxes? So that they have to be next to the governance center, perhaps in the city of Waconia where I live, or could they be next to a retirement home, or could they be, I'm just trying to figure out what are the criterion that go into these things, and are other states that are utilizing these, what are they doing?
Secretary Simon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative Nash. Yeah, good question. Basically, these words aren't in the statute, but what it comes down to is something that's within sort of the possession, custody, or control of the county or the city, or I suppose in some cases the township. So for now, there isn't a lot of prescriptive language. As Chair Nelson said, I've committed to putting together, along with members of the House and the Senate, a working group to discuss and refine these issues over the interim. And just to level set, just for a second, since I have the microphone, just so members know, and I know many of you do, this language in this compromise, and it is a heavily negotiated compromise, as Chair Nelson knows. I thank him for his patience. This was really necessary because as we learned this last election with the popularity of absentee voting and therefore the popularity of drop boxes across Minnesota, there was next to nothing in statute providing what you just said, Representative Nash, guardrails or guidelines. Basically, I'm paraphrasing here, but Minnesota statute, as we sit here today, in essence says drop boxes may exist. And that's it. There's nothing in law, it hasn't been until this point, regulating, in a major way, security or chain of custody or monitoring or anything of the kind. So this is a great step forward. But I think refinements are in order over the interim, and I'm happy to work with you in particular or any other member who's interested in ideas.
Representative Nash.
And Mr. Chair, yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the Secretary. And, I guess, and for those that have served with me on committee for a while, know I like the details to be in the bill before we move forward with the law. And I just am a little dismayed that we didn't put something as benign as what do you do with the video from a retention policy. And if that defaults to a standard retention policy, how hard is it to put into the bill that it would follow standard retention policies? Or, certainly we'd want to be able to share data between jurisdictions. So I guess my question for both the Secretary and for Chair Nelson, the working group that's going to be created, is that going to, much like the Blue Ribbon Council did with Representative Bonner and myself, is that going to map directly into a piece of into language in a bill that we pass before we have this next election? Because certainly it seems like we want those guardrails in place prior to actually having to do these things.
Secretary Simon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative Nash. I think that's a great point. Yes, I mean, my intention is to convene folks along with members of the House and Senate, all three, to discuss things that could be implemented next session in time for the 2022 election. That's the goal here. Certainly it's my goal. So to put in refinements of the kind that you're talking about. And just a word about, about process here. I don't want to speak for him, but Chair Nelson and I, for that matter, were put in an unusual position, I'd say. Candidly, none of this language was heard by any committee in either chamber, but it was made clear to us at the last minute, meaning the last few days, that this that we needed in order to get this bill done to negotiate language over drop boxes. I wish, as I'm sure all of us do, that the Senate, frankly, had heard this in a bill before a committee if it wanted it so badly. But it was never heard by any committee, which is highly unorthodox. Not only didn't it come off either chamber on the House floor, it didn't even receive a hearing, notwithstanding many attempts. So you can imagine our surprise when we were told at the last minute that this is something we had to negotiate on at the last minute. So that, honestly, when this happens, sometimes some of the details need refinement, which is why the working group, I think, is important.
And Representative Nash, like I said, this was something that came in from the Senate at the last minute. So Representative Nash.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And to the Secretary's point, I'm not going to argue that I know this came in last minute, but there were many other provisions and are many other provisions from the DFL that are being put into bills that were never heard in committee. So I don't want to have too much acrimony over something that is being done also by the other side of the aisle. But I guess my question for the Secretary, are you the sole determiner of when this working group is going to meet and convene and the policy that will come out of that? And are you in control of that? And will you commit to actually having those working group meetings over the interim so that we can indeed, when we come back in February, have model language drafted and begin putting that through the committee process And what is the composition of the committee that you're envisioning? And perhaps that's a legislative controlled issue, and I actually would be comfortable with that as well. So maybe you could, Mr. Chair, you could outline that, and maybe then the secretary.
Oh, well, I'll let the Secretary of State speak on it because he has made the commitment to myself and to Senator Kiffmeyer, and he's made it here, but I'll let Secretary Simon, if you want to answer the question.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative Nash. Yeah, the reason I think we all agreed in the end to keep it less formal rather than more, rather than putting something in statute, because that's what's worked the last few years. And Representative Nash, I think you in particular were involved with some of those efforts. We've had at least 2, maybe 3, depending on how you count, working groups on election-related topics the last few years, whether it's election security, whether it's grants for elections equipment, where we didn't have to put anything in statute. We just had folks from all 4 caucuses in our office and other stakeholders from local governments in the room. It wasn't formal. There were no roll call votes. We just got together periodically and successfully, I would say, hashed out some compromise language. So that's the model that I anticipate, but I'm committed to doing that over the interim and gathering stakeholders and others just as I described. So it doesn't have to be overly formal because that less formal process has worked, I think, quite well over the last few years. So it's just a repeat of what we've been doing.
Representative Nash.
Can give us the details on that as well. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And then I won't belabor this point, but I will say something perhaps a little more formal when we're dealing with something that is as hot an issue as election integrity for both sides. Would be more prudent than not to codify or formalize some approach, namely majority and minority members from each chamber and otherwise, because if we're going to have to get those people to carry that language into various committees or whatever, we're gonna need those people having buy-off, and I think a more formal process would actually create better policy and create a better outcome. For example, if I myself were not included in these conversations and yet am the ranking member on this committee from the minority, I'm going to be considerably less inclined to be supportive of that if I wasn't included in that effort. And so I just would encourage you, Mr. Secretary, and to the chair, perhaps, Mr. Chair, there are opportunities to yet amend this bill, and I won't say capriciously, since I may be guilty of offering some capricious amendments in the past, but in the interest of creating better policy, bring an amendment that really does put up some definitions and guardrails and make it so that this working group is set up for success instead of a fairly low level of expectation of, oh, we'll meet over the interim and maybe we'll get some stuff done. I think that the more we create a demand out of ourselves, particularly on elections issues, the better off we're going to be.
Thank you, Representative Nash. Representative Mason, you had a question. I saw Commissioner Davis had her hand up also.
Do you want to take her first?
Why don't we go? She's waving her head. No, go ahead, Representative Mason.
Okay, just to follow up on this past discussion, I mean, what I'm hearing is that it was not part of either the Senate or the House's original bills. It was made, the only way to get the bill passed is with that provision in it. And I guess, to me, that is really disappointing. I mean, that to me is a real abuse of power. And as I said, and I understand where Representative Nash is going, but again, the point is, this never went through any discussion. So obviously there are some people that don't care, period, about making things compromising as much as possible. So that's just a comment. I'm really disappointed that something is getting in that was not in either bill. That's wrong, in my opinion. End of comment.
Mr. Chair, this is Representative Nash.
Representative Nash.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and certainly Representative Mason. I am always interested in having bill language come through committee, but I got to be honest, both sides are doing this, Representative Mason. So the outrage should be directed at both parties. This is happening with DFL and GOP. So let's make sure that we're not also invoking motives and personalities and saying that people don't care, because both sides are doing it, and you know it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And Representative Nash and Representative Mason, as I pointed out, there was very few items that came into this that weren't in either the House bill or the Senate bill. This was one that towards the end of negotiations with the Senate, that it was one of three things, and two of those three things weren't in either bill. Again, this is one that came forward that we worked out, and we worked out with the Secretary of State, and we worked out with the Senate. That again, it's not something I like doing either, but this is one of the the 4 or 5 things that were put in here that we didn't have. And again, it was the vet cemetery that came after our bill was closed up, and actually after we were in conference, the operating costs for the vets homes was something that came. The numbers came on that after we were already done with conference. So this is, like I said, it should not be standard practice to be dumping things into bills that aren't there, but this was something that the Senate insisted on, or they wouldn't negotiate on the bill. So that's the position we were in. Commissioner Roberts Davis, did you want to comment on Commissioner Davis?
Thank you, Chair Nelson. I raised my hand in that. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Yep.
Okay, great. I raised my hand in that quiet moment when you asked if there were any commissioners who wanted to speak. So if you're ready for me, I'm ready.
Yeah,
Mr.
go ahead.
Chair, can I ask a question about the election policy? The raise hand function isn't, at least on my Zoom. So I texted Amanda about 5 minutes ago.
Okay, I've seen other hands go up. So whatever. Well, why don't we let Ms. Davis comment, and then we'll get back to your question, Senator Representative Greenman. Ms. Davis.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Nelson and members and everyone. For the record, I'm Alice Roberts Davis, Commissioner of the Department of Administration, and I would like to start by thanking you, Chair Nelson, and your staff for your willingness to work with admin and understand the critical needs of our department. I'm pleased that there is an agreement on a final state government omnibus bill that works for all Minnesotans and furthers efficient and accountable state government. The omnibus bill will fund admin's essential operations, and the modest increases will help us maintain public infrastructure and support continued state operations. I'd also like to express my thanks that the chairs recognize the importance of the funding increase for in lieu of rent. As you know, this is the only funding for operations and maintenance of the public, legislative, and ceremonial spaces on the Capitol complex, and this is critical for maintaining the expected standard of care for these buildings. Additionally, admin appreciates the technical changes that were included in the previous omnibus bill that was passed during the regular session. These updates will clean up our statutes and assist admin's current work. Finally, Chair Nelson, I'd like to thank you for pushing for the state match that supports Minnesota's business community by leveraging federal funds from the U.S. Department of Defense for the Procurement Technical Assistance Center. The PTAC focuses on building capacity for targeted group, economically disadvantaged and veteran-owned businesses, and it's very important to our state. I'm really disappointed that we did not make it into the final agreement, but I really do appreciate all the work you did to push for inclusion there. Thank you for the opportunity to share our perspective this morning, and I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone may have.
Thank you, Ms. Roberts Davis. Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just, appreciate you, Commissioner Robert Davis, but this is actually a question for for the Secretary of State, just sort of following on the final set of questions we had. I am pleased to see that we have resources in the bill for local elections officials and local jurisdictions, both on the drop box for specifically the drop boxes and also for other local elections equipment. And I'm wondering if you could just describe a little bit about, I know that the local elections administrations are going to be thinking about what they need, but if you can describe a little bit about what you anticipate those funds being used for by locals.
Secretary Simon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative Greenman. Yeah, there are 3 pots of money in here for local governments. So important because putting on a statewide election is really a team sport. Our office has a role, but counties, cities, and townships are equal partners, and they do a fantastic job year in and year out. And so there are 3 pots of money. One is money that this legislature and all of you already dealt with some time ago, which is the Help America Vote Act election security money that came from Congress. This would set aside $3 million from that pot of money exclusively for grants to local governments. That could mean hardware, it could mean software, it could mean other security upgrades. So that's one pot of money. The second pot of money in this bill is $1.5 million to supplement grants for elections equipment, actual tabulators, things of that nature, assisted voting technology for voters with a disability. And members may recall, if they were around in particular, that in 2017, you all appropriated $7 million for that purpose. This is an additional $1.5 million. There are a few who didn't fully take advantage of the $7 million from 2017, and there's still some lingering needs in the election equipment category. So that's number 2. And number 3 in the bill is the pot of money that was just recently discussed to help counties and cities implement these standards for drop boxes. And I think that's crucial as well, because after all, recording, data retention, sufficient, other security considerations, bolting, the boxes themselves, whatever, those things cost money. So this will help counties defray, if not completely cover those costs as well. So those are the 3 basic pots of money, but it's very, very important because they're the ones who do the legwork. Our office, as you know, we don't count a single ballot, never. We don't touch ballots. That all happens at the local levels, counties, cities, and township, and they deserve to have the resources they need to get that job done and do it securely.
Representative Greenman.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I really appreciate, I know that these resources were supported by both the House and the Senate position. And, I think as we saw in the 2020 election and moving forward, how important it is that we're supporting our local elections administrators from a state perspective. And so just really grateful that we're giving them both the resources and the flexibility to do what their voters need. So grateful to see this in the bill and that we're supporting and resourcing the policy that we're creating.
Thank you. And now we can finish up here. Commissioner Doty, if you want, I see you got your hand up. And then the other commissioners, if they want to give their perspective. Commissioner Doty.
Thank you, Chair Nelson. Just real briefly here, Chair Nelson and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today and for the opportunity and for the important work you've done all session during the negotiation process to fund essential services provided by state agencies across Minnesota. For the record, my name is Robert Doty, Commissioner at the Minnesota Department of Revenue. And I'm here today to thank you for including a healthy operating adjustment for the department in the final state government budget. The department works year-round to provide vital services to customers around the state, and this level of funding ensures that we will be able to continue to provide services at the level and quality expected by Minnesotans. The department processes 3.1 million individual income tax returns, processes 2.5 million pieces of mail, and sends out 2.1 million individual income tax refunds. This is in addition to the roughly 518,000 customer requests we receive in a typical year. And I think we all can agree this year has been anything but typical. Our operating adjustment will ensure that we are able to administer our current scope of work, which does not include the work in the tax bill. Funding for administration of that work is provided in the tax bill itself. Thank you for your work and commitment to ensuring that state agencies are properly funded through the upcoming biennium. I also would like to thank you for including an increase of $250,000 over the biennium for the Volunteer Income Tax Assistance Program, or VITA, in the budget. Through this program, thousands of low and moderate income tax filers receive free tax support from trained and certified volunteers across the state who help people claim income boosting tax credits or meet their tax obligations. The demand for free tax assistance is greater than what is available. While we had hoped for the full increase in funding as recommended by the governor and to reflect need, we are excited to be able to expand the VITA program and support more low and moderate income tax filers during the next biennium with our increased funding. Chair Nelson and members of the committee, thank you again for the work you have done to support state agencies and their work during regular session and special sessions. We appreciate your dedication. I'm happy to stand for any questions the committee has at this time.
Thank you, Commissioner Doty. Commissioner Showalter, you want to give some comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, my name is Jim Showalter. I'm Commissioner of Minnesota Management and Budget. Appreciate the chance to make some comments today and reflect on the hours of work that resulted in the state omnibus bill, state government omnibus bill. Before moving to substance, I just want to thank you, Chair, and your team, Amanda and everyone who have gotten us to this place, because you have helped us weigh priorities and convene stakeholders and have meetings at all kinds of time, and just appreciate your willingness to give us a chance to give us input, and ultimately that you led us to this final agreement. In early days of session, I noted that a budget is really a statement of values. Throughout this session, we've had discussions, we've collaborated on proposals to impact the lives of Minnesotans for the better. And many aspects of this bill achieve this end. As I've noticed several times, I just want to, the professionalism and dedication of the state's workforce has just been amazing. And I am particularly proud of my colleagues at MMB, but I also want to call out my colleagues at admin, at Minute, at Revenue, and across the state government. The work they do on a daily basis is often unnoticed, but these public servants really approach their job every day with a goal to support Minnesotans and help us for generations to come. This bill provides operating adjustments so that we have a chance to continue that important work, and the work of our state employees continues. Now, one of the things that I think in the public domain, people don't realize is that that work isn't just to spend more money, it's also to find new ideas and do new things. And I'm really pleased that this final agreement includes a Payment Plus program from MMB. It's an example of ways where we're looking for ways to innovate and create savings for the general fund. Over the last several weeks, we came together to find final compromise on several aspects of this bill. One of those is the pharmacy benefit manager. As a result of negotiation, real attention to detail, MMB will use a reverse auction process as identified in this bill to contract with a PBM with the goal of achieving additional savings for members of the state employee group insurance program, or SEGIP. We appreciated the cooperation and working back and forth, because we knew we could do it by ourselves, but we knew that there was also strong interest from the legislature to make sure that there were laws and boundaries around this, and appreciate the work that you, Chair Nelson, helped us to get to a solution. Before closing, I just want to acknowledge those elements of this bill that directly impact Minnesotans and don't really fall under a particular state agency. That includes the Market Bucks program, SNAP, where SNAP benefits, where SNAP recipients will be able to access healthy foods from neighborhood farmers. I appreciate the chairs and their commitment to finding opportunities for inclusion of this provision and ensure our actions at the Capitol meaningfully impact our communities, whether through services we provide as state agencies or ensuring that fruits and vegetables make it to the tables of our neighbors. So, Chair Nelson, in conclusion, thank you for your partnership in this process. Happy to take any questions that committee members may have, and just look forward to the passage of this bill and wrapping up this state budget. Thank you.
And Commissioner Tomes, and we have the AG here also. If anybody has questions, session's going to be started, so we only got about 5 minutes left before we got to sign off here, so we can get signed into session. So, Commissioner Tomes.
Good morning, Chair Nelson. For the record, my name is Tarek Tomes, and I am the Commissioner of Minnesota IT Services and the Chief Information Officer for the state of Minnesota. First off, as my colleagues have, really want to sincerely thank you and the rest of the committee members for all of the work that you have done and your commitment to reaching a compromise agreement. I know difficult work, but really sincere appreciation for that. Wanted to call out appreciation for support of the governor's change item that supports a number of the Blue Ribbon Council's recommendations that'll bring greater consistency for how agencies approach modernization opportunities, and certainly will raise the value of many of the projects and initiatives that have a technology support. Our partnership and work together with the Blue Ribbon Council over the last 18 to 24 months and our ongoing work together has already brought about so much value, and we're incredibly excited to see where that continues to go in the future. Really looking forward to the Legislative Commission on Cybersecurity. I am extremely confident that that committee will be very valuable and look forward to working together with that committee. Wanted to thank you also for the language once again related to cash flow assistance and also the prior passage of minutes statutory cleanup language, as well as making the BRC a permanent body within state government. Lastly, just wanted to mention or reiterate, we certainly know that reliable and innovative technology plays such a central role to services that are rendered by, governed by the executive branch, and our commitment and excitement to supporting all of the technology components across all of the bills that will be signed this year. We really look forward to engaging in that work. With that, just wanted to thank you again, and if anyone has any questions.
And lastly, you're going to get the last word. Attorney General Keith Ellison, welcome to the committee. Identify yourself for the tape.
My name is Keith Ellison. I'm the Attorney General for the state of Minnesota, and I want to thank you, Mr. Chair, and the entire committee for your excellent work. I know how hard you've been working, and I appreciate all the care and detail you've put into it. I will note one thing is that our change item request for criminal support was not recognized. I understand that you're frugal, trying to watch every penny, but I did want to just share with the committee that there are about 8 or 9 counties in the state of Minnesota who, if they get a serious homicide or criminal sexual assault, are in a position to handle it. We are the prosecutor of last resort. Counties call on us quite frequently. We do about 12 very serious offenses a year, and we do appeals all over the state. And so without any additional assistance, it means we will be doing more work, but we won't have any additional resources to do it. And so this really is a program for the benefit of Greater Minnesota. So I just share that information with you for your consideration, but we are very grateful for the appropriation you have made. It's important. The work you've done is critical, but I do urge you to read the words of the Minnesota County Attorneys Association Chair Executive Director Bob Small, and that particularly of Hennepin County Attorney Mike Freeman, who's made it clear that the work we do is vital and needs to be supported. So I just thank you for your work all over again, and wish you the best, and very, very, very grateful for your help.
Thank you, Attorney General Ellison. And members, with that, we just want to wrap up here. This is the bill that was negotiated, and as the Attorney General mentioned, that one piece was one piece that we weren't able to get agreement on with the Senate, and it's something we fought hard for in the negotiations. But at the end of the day, we were unable to get the Senate to agree to funding that one piece. And so, members, any one last question? And I know that's dangerous. If not, members, with that, we'll look forward to this being in Ways and Means and then coming to the floor. And again, like I said, this is a heavily negotiated with the Senate, and hopefully, as this moves forward, we can get it passed and signed by the governor so that we can fund not only the other parts of government, but also the legislature ourselves the pay for all of our staff, our wonderful staff that we have throughout the state. So with that, members, we are adjourned.